Everyone, we are going to begin the family remarks. We are bringing up Deborah, our beloved Deborah, who is going to start.
The last one of the 9. Want a chair?
You want a chair?
No, I'm all right. I just want you kids to know that you're not the only ones hurting today.
That's not a real microphone. You're going to have to talk.
I need to. Well, why'd you get? I don't want to
No,
toy.
you hold it. No, you hold it because it works with that.
Oh, it works
Okay.
with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
so when they play it back, but
Well,
you project your voice.
I'll use my street voice.
Yeah, use that. Street voice.
Well, as it happens, I'll let you know you're not the only ones hurting. Because in 1941, a very special baby was born into the Goodwin family on September 15th. He had a mother and father who adored him. His mother loved him so much until she lived with her aunt, but she wanted her to have her own private family. So what she did while she was still very, very new in having a baby, she went into a very cold house, and she cleaned it so she could have her own private family. She caught cold, and she died 2 months later of galloping consumption. So what my mother and father did, they took him in and he was my little brother. He thought he was my brother until he was 11 years old. And then by the time his mother and father took him, the rest of the story is history. But we took advantage of the fact that my mother and father had a weakness for him because he didn't have a mother. So we said, Archie, go ask Pop for some money. He'll say, my papa said, who told you to ask? Deborah, and I dropped dead. See, but we used it to our advantage because we knew my mother and father loved them that much. But it's not easy. But you know what? Whoever said he sends your comforter is the memories you have of him. Because he was a crazy boy, and I know when I was dating, one of the boys, I walked to the vestibule with one of the boys, and the boy said, Debbie, I don't like you. I don't love you. I'm crazy about you. So he went home. I'm sitting in the living room. This little Archie comes up, 7 years old, and says, Debbie, I don't like you. I don't love you. I'm crazy about you. I said, Mom, see that? But he was crazy. And I enjoyed it. And when I called him, when we got grown, I would call him. He had this uproarious laughter. Anybody else would laugh like they had good sense, but never Archie. He'd go, ha, ha, ha. You can hear him all over the building. So what he would do when I would talk to him, he'd wait for me to say something smart alecky, and then he'd roar. So I got used to the fact that he'd wait for that. But many times when we talked, he'd bring up his childhood because we were all crazy. And we needed him when he needed us because we used him for our mother and father to get what we wanted. So, all right. Come and get this toy. Come and get this toy.
You stood up. You might as well.
You tell the story.
I'm closing.
You're closing? Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to ad lib because I have no idea what I'm going to say. But my dad taught me a lot of things, and I could probably stand up here for hours and tell stories. But I'll just ramble a little bit. My dad, he taught me how to shoot pool. Maybe I'll talk about a pool shooting story. He used to take us when I was probably about maybe this tall, about 10 years old. My brother was about 8, and he wanted us to know about the streets. He wanted us to know about life so we could handle ourselves on the streets. This is up in New York, and believe it, a lot of people might not agree with this, but he would take us into the bars where he would shoot pool. And this was back, had to be back in the 70s and 80s. I was born in 65, so it was 70s. We go into these real roughneck bars, and he'd shoot pool in there. Now, the way he shot pool, he was real good. He was a good pool shot, but he didn't do anything lightly. He shot what I would call kung fu pool. So, and I'm not kidding around. And this is the way he taught me how to shoot pool. And it was very hard to adapt to a different pool game. But every shot was explosive. And he would literally, he'd be in there, you know, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. And you know, he would and then he hop back with that pool stick. And I'm not joking, you know. And so we'd be in. One time we're in this little bar up in New York, and I'm about this tall, and he used to, you know, he went to the bathroom. He took off, and he always gave us instructions, you know. So we knew we're standing there with all these grown men, you know, roughneck bar, and we don't talk. We just mind our business. So these two guys were talking, and they were saying some, I don't remember what they were saying, but they were saying some negative things or whatever, and they were trying to set something up, because a lot of times what would happen is he was a real good pool shot, so people would either bet on him or bet on the other guy. Now, I'm not endorsing this is just what used to happen. And if somebody's betting money on you when you're shooting pool, you're supposed to get a cut of that. You know, you're not just supposed to be betting on you and all that stuff. But anyway, I remember telling him about it, and you know, just telling him, hey, these guys were saying a little something when he was gone, but I didn't know what to do. You know, I'm just a little kid, you know, in the scene. But it was interesting. I mean, he was really known on the streets. People knew him as preacher. They would call him Reverend. You know, that's what he was known as, because he would preach the gospel, and he would fight. You know, he would be in, you know, he was not afraid of people. I mean, he would walk down the street, and Daniel, my brother Daniel, who's 2 years younger than me, and we're still about this tall, so he's walking down the street, and then one of us, we would flank him. This is what our position was. We were like his lieutenant. And so we walk down the street, and he's whipping it. And, you know, always situational awareness. You're always looking about. And so then, what else? We had to go like this. Every so many steps. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? This is the truth. I'm not making this up. This is what we did. And we had to follow these instructions. It was very, very strict. And so then, that was it. And it was all the three of us. We'd go about 10 steps. I don't remember what the trigger. I think we were trained to know when he spun, we spun, and that's the way it worked. And so I'm not making this up. And I remember one of my memories is we came around. You know, we weren't always with him, because he'd be out shooting pool. I mean, late hours. He didn't have us out those late hours, but if he was out during the day and he decided he was going to stop and shoot some pool on occasion, he would take us in. So one day we're walking down the street, and we come around the corner, and then there's these three dudes coming up. And they saw my dad, and they just turned around and went the other way, because he was known. They knew that it was time to go the other way, because they had learned. No, because they just knew that they better not mess with him. But you know, there were some tough times though. The streets were rough. I mean, one night he came home. You know, at this time, you know, I remember waiting up 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like waiting for my dad to come home, because you know, you're worried. You know, these streets are dangerous. He came home, up to the door, and his shirt, even when he was out then, you know, he had a nice dress shirt. I remember this shirt very vividly. It was like a white shirt with green stripes in it. But this is all blood right here. And he had, that night he had been stabbed. He had been in some kind of disagreement with somebody in a bar, and then the guy, he left. And the guy, the guy came up, saw him on the street, and was talking to him, and he said the guy went, and he thought the guy had hit him in the chest, and he wasn't worried about it, this little whatever, but just so happened the guy had actually stabbed him. And so he walked a few miles. He went, took the bus home, and because the guy stabbed him and ran off, or else other things might have happened from there. But the thing was that night, I stayed up with him for hours, and I was in the next room, and I kept checking on him, and he refused to go to the hospital because he just didn't believe in hospitals. It probably had something to do with the fact that he probably had an aversion to hospitals from losing his leg as a young child, and he didn't want anything to do with the hospital. So I ended up calling the hospital, or calling an ambulance early in the morning, and they took him to the hospital. And he actually, by the time the ambulance and the police all got there, he didn't want to go, but it was too late by that time, so they took him to the hospital, and he had a collapsed lung, and they had to put a tube in and drain the blood out, but he bounced back from that, and he wasn't out. He still went out from time to time over the years to shoot pool and that sort of thing. But a lot of stories, a lot of interesting stories. I really didn't follow the same path as far as out there in the street shooting pool, but I developed a pretty good pool game from the things that he taught me. My dad had some very particular things that he taught me about pool. Some of them I don't even think they're worth really sharing, but it gave it gave some. He just had a very, very serious approach to a lot of aspects of life, and I started off saying that he really taught me a lot, and he really did. And I guess early on, one of the things that I learned from him was that you can do anything you want to in the world. I mean, I never saw my dad having any limitations. Although he had one leg, there was not a two-legged man that could outdo him at anything that he wanted to do. That included hand-to-hand combat, which was one of the big things that he taught me as far as martial arts. And I mean, there was many men that learned a hard lesson about that. And I was talking earlier with Ezekiel about, I mean, he had trophies in all sorts of athletics in high school. And, I mean, he spent time to teach us a little bit about martial arts and different things. And so the mindset that I had built in me was there's really no limits to what you can do. And it's really helped me throughout my life, and in terms of me feeling like, well, if there's something that I want to do, it's just really a matter of, do I really want to do it and set my mind to doing it. So like I said, I could talk for hours about my dad and interesting stories, but I think Ezekiel's going to give you some good laughs up here, I hope, because I can use them too. And but I wish I could give you guys hours, but I'm going to pass the microphone to Ezekiel. Thank you. Wait, oh, you go. So who's gonna come up? Go. Okay, I want to hear. Okay, but we're gonna. We gotta tell the snowsuit story.
Sorry, Zeke, I didn't plan on being next.
Don't you apologize.
Okay. Well, it's really an interesting story about your father. I guess was I 16, Mom, or 15? 16, and my brother was 15. Archie he was living in Swinksville. And one of the things what you guys said, how he wanted to always prove that just because he had one leg, he was no different than anybody else. So if the speed limit was 20, he did 80. So we weren't even afraid when we went on roller coasters, because if you rode with Archie, you have already been on your first roller coaster. That's just how, that's just how he drove down regular streets. You were always scared. So he came and picked us up, and my mother agreed which I don't understand why, to let us spend a whole weekend with Archie up in Swinksville, and this is what we did. I don't know, you guys were so young, I don't think you even remember Swinksville. Well, let me tell you what it was like. When you walked in, first there was no place to walk, because like you said, Archie had no rules. Somewhere in his life, whatever happened, rules went right out the window. That meant cleaning, cooking, buying groceries, anything that had a rule. He was just going to do it his way. So we would go there. He has these. Mom, we didn't get to the gun yet. My goodness, they want to jump to the. When you buy a book, do you turn to the last page? Am I telling? I think they should tell my story. I'm not telling about the gun yet. I have to tell you the other part before we get to the gun so you understand what happened with the gun. Okay, thank you for understanding. Okay, so anyway, when we got up there was these things hanging from the ceiling with every bug you can name. That would have been great for a science class because Archie didn't believe in screens, so he had things hanging so anything that flew in stuck by every one of these things. So that's how it was when we went in there. It was already a jungle because you had to try to find a place to step and to walk, But as time went, okay, let's get to the gun. But anyway, that was picturing what it was like. My brother Jerry, anyone who knows him, when Jerry thinks that he is right, then he will show you he is right. You know what I mean? So let me explain that. I was laying on a chair. Archie had him shooting a rifle out of a window. So he shot the rifle and all the shells were gone. So he was bored. So he came and took the gun and put it at my temple. But Archie came into the room and he knows my brother. So he kind of said, oh my God, Jerry's going to pull that trigger because he asked Jerry, he said, don't do that. Jerry said, well, no, there's nothing in here. I shot it all out. But Archie was getting closer and closer as he was doing it because he already knows the mindset of my brother, which was one of the things about Archie. He was extremely intelligent. With anything else, he was extremely intelligent, and he had that sense, and thank God I wouldn't be here today if he didn't have this one sense. So he got close enough. As soon as he did, he must have realized the timing he was getting ready to do it. As soon as Archie hit the gun, it went off into two doors. My brother passed out, and so did I, so... But you would think that would be enough for us to go home because we cried every day. Can we go home? He said, now you're afraid of guns. I can't let you leave here afraid of guns. So he took us outside and he loaded a shotgun for both of us. And he told us the story. He said, now when he's putting the bullets in, or whatever you call them, and he said, if I put one that's too small, it's going to blow your face off. He said, so I got to make sure I put the right one in. Now, who wants to play this game thinking that their face might get blown off? I wanted to go home, But he wouldn't hear of that. And every time we said we want to go home, he thought it was because we were not having fun, So he planted us in front of a tree, and then I put the rifle out, or what do you call it, the shotgun, and then he said, no, he hopped over. Karen, you'll break your shoulder. Don't put it there. But he didn't tell me where to put it. So I put it out there, and I shot. The thing went back, and I fell to the ground, and I saw all the blood, and I immediately thought my face was blown off because of the blood, So he said to me, I don't know where he got his MD, but he took me over to a drain, and he said, stand there like this and let the blood keep coming out until it clots. Then you won't get an infection. And I just said, I just want to go home. But no. So anyway, when we finally, and I want to just add to that too. When we were in Swingsville, when you were talking about pool, he took us to a pool, just like you described, even, where adults are playing pool. But the food, we were going fishing every day for our food because he wanted us to know how to fish. And so he would buy these, and then the fish were illegal. They weren't even, they're supposed to be a certain size. And the people told Archie, they said, they ain't the right size. You can't get them fish. But they was fish, and he was going to eat them, and he got them, and that's what we had to eat too. So he took us into town of Swingsville, my brother and I. Now, we had a pool table at our house, so we knew how to play pool. And when he took us into this bar, we were hungry. And when we saw people playing and we smelled cheesesteaks and stuff like that, my brother and I said, we're going to challenge somebody to a game and hopefully we get some food. So that's what we did. We went up to these men, and we challenged them. My brother didn't win, but I did. I was hungry. I mean, I didn't have to make them those karate sounds, but I tell you what, I had a perfect aim every time I shot my ball. I won my meal, but I shared it with my brother, and we still cried, "Can we home? We just want to go home." But anyway, finally, after my disaster with the shotgun, he decided to take us home. When he came down our street, it almost looked like a cartoon. The doors opened to that car, and they stayed open because we just ran before Archie had a chance to take off again. We just left them doors open. When my mother saw my face, she had to take me immediately to the emergency ward where they had to open up my scar, clean out all the infection, put a Band-Aid from here to here, which took away my cuteness. In them days, I was cute because I was young. I was cute, so he messed up my cuteness for a minute, But anyway, so as time went on, and if you look closely when we're talking tonight, I will have that scar on my nose until I die. That's my Archie story.
Weekends with my father. Apparently, there is much more to be thankful for than waking up in the morning. What do you say? Does anyone else have from the family have anything to say before we move forward? Nothing. Well,
Archie was my superstar. Oh, yes, Lord. Taught me how basketball. Taught me how to fight. Fight well. Well, he did. Beat me up. And as he beat me up, I learned. Well. Our childhood was great. We would go in the house. We would raid the refrigerator. And Uncle Benny didn't know. And I was didn't know. And we would go in the house. I was so proud. I remember when Gloria and he came home. I remember when Desiree was born. And she's the prettiest, the nicest jaws, and she still had the same beautiful throat that she had when she was first born. He was so intelligent that a lot of people didn't realize. He was so intelligent that a lot of people didn't realize the gift that God had given him. He helped me with my homework. We went through the loss of his leg, and we loved each other
as brothers and sisters would love each other. When Archie graduated and he left, I didn't know where Archie was. And what happened, I told Gloria. My husband owned WHEC TV in Rochester, New York. I had no idea where Archie was. And they were so proud that that particular station being ours, they said, Mr. and Mrs. Goodwin, how do you feel about your daughter winning the scholarship? I said, I don't believe this, Reagan. They said, what do you mean, Regina? I said, they said Goodwin, and I turned. And I said, my God, that's my cousin. I said, that's my cousin. My husband looked at me, he said, who? I said, Archibald Goodwin and Gloria. And then who should I see? Was Desiree winning the scholarship to go to college. It blew my mind. I called the station, I said, don't let him go, don't let him go. He had no idea, I had no idea, that all these years that we owned that TV station, that he was there. From that point on, he would call me, I would call him, and there was so much to talk about that the phone bill, because I would call this certain number that he would give me. And I am so upset, but I'm happy. I'm happy because Archie is out of his pain. And he was like my brother. And I'm the only child. And he was the only child. So we were extremely, extremely close to one another. And I will love to learn to love all of his children. And I am sorry within my heart that I never got the opportunity to come to you when you guys were in Rochester. Okay? But you had a wonderful father. And I loved him not as much as you, but I loved him. And may God be with him, because I know that he is with God.
Okay, we're taking our final break of the evening. We just have two more things to do, okay, before Reverend Palmer leads us out with prayer. We had desserts and cake that's around, and we only have about 25 minutes left. So what we're going to do is make sure that everybody gets what they need, or 35, but we want to make sure that everybody gets what they need. And okay, Desiree?
I'm going to share a story about my father. As a little girl, I loved my father so much. I thought he was the best father in the world. I used to follow him as he was going out the front door every day. This is one of my earliest memories of him. And I'd follow him up to the gate, and then I'd ask, "Where are you going, Daddy?" He's like, "I have to go to work." And I'd be like, "Why do you have to go to work?" And I just wanted him to stay home and play. So I would just follow him to the gate every day, and I thought it was so unfair that this thing called work would take my dad away every day. So I'd have to wait all day for him to come home. And that's one of my earliest memories. Like, why do you have to go to work, Daddy? You know. And so my favorite memories of him are when we lived on the West Coast, and Dad used to take us to the beach, and we could play on the beach, and Dad would go crabbing on the dock, and we'd just play all day in the sand. And then come and watch him drop crab traps and pull up crabs. And he had a special way of making us go to bed at night. I was 5. And he'd say, okay, it's 8 o'clock. Giggling and run off, get our toothbrushes and brush our teeth really fast. And we'd like running up the stairs, getting under the covers, covering up our heads like, ee! Then we'd hear Dad coming up the stairs like, boom, 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 with his crutches. And then he'd come in and sit down next to us, and he'd tell us 3 bedtime stories. So he'd tell us Little Piggies, and then we'd ask for another story, and that 3 was his limit. So he'd tell 3 stories, and that was the bedtime ritual every night. When I was around 5, it was you have to brush your teeth before the monster comes, so we would brush our teeth, and that was a lot of fun for us. And we do what we're supposed to do so we can get our bedtime story from the monster, and then the other thing is he liked to encourage me to read. And he got me Richard Scarry's big book of stories with all these cartoon characters, and I would just look at all the pictures and read, and then sometimes he'd sit down with me and have me read to him, and then if I'd stumble over the words, he'd have me try to pronounce it till I got it right. Then if he felt sorry for me because I couldn't quite pronounce it, he would tell me how to say something like bedraggled prince. I'd be like bedraggled. Try it again. Bedraggled. Okay, it's bedraggled prince. And one of my favorite gifts he ever gave me were 2 sets of encyclopedias. He gave me a set of Compton's encyclopedias from around 1910 and another set of Collier's encyclopedias from around 1930. And this was when I was around 10 or 11, and I would just read them from cover to cover. And then from time to time, whenever he had a gift to give me, it would always be books. So it'd be books about the Eskimos or Thor Heyerdahl, and it was all kinds of history. And I would just read all these books he'd bring home. And I think he just helped me to love learning and reading. And the other things I remember that I love, the first time that Dad took me to see the fireworks, I remember that. And like summer evenings, and Dad would take us on long road trips. And he had a big Chevy station wagon, and the 3 of us, when we were little, we'd sleep in sleeping bags under the stars. He'd open the back of the Chevy station wagon, and we'd just be in our little sleeping bags, and you'd feel the night air, and you'd hear the crickets, and I used to love those road trips. And we lived in the Rocky Mountains for a while in a Gulfstream trailer, and I have memories of that, and Dad going fishing. And of course, Dad's laughter. I just loved Dad's laughter, throughout my childhood to adulthood. It was just a wonderful thing to hear him laugh. And I do want to do one more song I prepared. It's very short, and because I feel like it's very sad to lose my father. I feel like an orphan almost. I lost my mother a few years ago. It is, it's not easy to lose the last parent I had on the earth. So, Dad loved to hear me sing. So, and that's why I decided to bring my voice out and dust it off. As I used to sing my little brothers and sisters to sleep at night, every night. And that would be the younger set of children. And so this is for the children that remain. It's the Dad's children that are remaining on the earth. And it's called Bless the Beast and the Children. Bless the beast and the children, for the world can never be the world they see. Bless the beast and the children, for in this world they have no voice. They have no choice. Light their way when the darkness surrounds them. Give them love, let it shine all around them. Bless the beast and the children. Give them shelter from the storm. Keep them safe. Keep them warm. Thank you.
Regardless of perception, I tell joke as a coping mechanism. I tell jokes because that's what's in me. I tell jokes in well, I was just going to say, so a bit about my father, and we will end with a song and a prayer, but just a bit about my father. To talk about death, and to talk about grieving, and to talk about loss is not something that happens in my family. And I mean mothers, father, children. It's not something that occurs. It happens, you deal with what happens, you move forward. The things that I wanted to share about my father is that for those of you who did know him, and there's no secrecy in it. I know what family we were when it came to the stories that other people told. Not out of being mean, but out of concern. My father was in no way a perfect man. No way. And he had rules, but those rules were a little, they were his. One of his favorite songs was I Did It My Way. And he did. And you know him, and he really did. But to look at the reality of it, without asking anybody in the room to share, just for a moment to think about if you were to leave today and somebody took every event of your life and posted it on this wall, would you be proud of everything that they read?
Yeah.
You would? I would. I don't know if, and I honestly don't know of anybody that would be proud of everything, because to err is human. The spirit within a human does what it does. Spoke about redemption. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a reverend. It was never in me. My father had his thing. My story starts with, I was the youngest boy. Here's the oldest. We have much in common, but we are very different within our approach. I was the son who fought my father. Not physically, because I'm not dumb. He did not play. I honestly did learn from my father how to clean a fish. I learned from my father how to break a concrete brick. I learned from my father how to swing a crowbar. I learned how to open doors and windows that were not opened, in case you needed to get into the house. But, I mean, and it's a technicality. It's open, it's not, you open it. But it wasn't to take from anyone, but there were times we were what you would call the latchkey children. I used to hold shame in that. But to talk about my father, I will tell you why I'm not. I'm like Ruben Studdard from American Idol. If somebody wants to grab me a rag to take care of this, because I have no shame in it. Grab me a couple. I know that this is on camera, but I refuse to be glistening. So let's get this taken care of. Another thing that my father taught me: take care of your needs as they occur. So I broke it down when I thought about him, because the way that my father died, the physical piece of it, the physical piece of the way my father died was very difficult. And he had many, many illnesses over the years that, for some reason, he bounced back from every one. Over and over and over and over. Fall off a cliff, leg comes off, start running track, why not? I mean, really, you go ahead, have lots of kids, don't act like you don't know how many of the, there's a lot. And where are the mothers of the children? They're no longer on this earth either, but there were a few. No one can deny what my dad used to look like. There's no big surprise about that either. There's him right here, growing up. He lived his life as he wanted. He lived his life as he wanted in every single way. But there's a different side to that. When you do live your life as you want, there are consequences for it. I'm not going to speak to that, but that's what he taught me. We rarely ever sat down to speak about anything because he was a very closed off person, believe it or not. As the years went on, he brought people in, but if you really wanted to know something about him, you didn't even know the half of it. He was a very closed off person as the years went on. But the pieces that I would talk about, the things that I'll remember about my father. So my father had, when I talk about what God has given someone, my father had these calluses on his hands from the crutches. And I remember he would hold my pinky while we're walking. And we're walking. Anywhere we would go, we didn't have a car that worked all the time. He'd hold my pinky while we were walking. And I remember, I'm walking, I'm counting my steps, and my pinky would brush across the callus. And I thought, one day, I'm going to have a callus like my father, because it meant hard work. He worked very hard in everything that he did. He worked very hard in everything that he did. So I just remember thinking, the callus, that was the first piece. And then I remember whenever my father would clean something, you mentioned cleaning, not a priority, but boy, when he did, my father could make, you can get a thing of pots and pans from a thrift store. My father, you give him 2 days, shining brighter than anything in the factory. And you wouldn't know, but he would sit at that sink for 12 hours straight, polishing each piece of it, because he wanted his family to eat from something that looked like new, because we didn't have it. So, callus and my father's laughter, if you remember, his laugh was one of the loudest, most crazy, most beautiful things that I always wish to remember, because it would fill the house. So I move forward and I think about his walk, the sound of crutches as he moved through the house. It wasn't always the best thing to hear because he had his problems. It wasn't the worst thing to hear because you remember. That's my father. So what he taught me, beyond all this stuff, my father was a fighter. He taught us to be. I fought my father on that. I believed in peace. I believed in trying to take care of stuff in a peaceful way. He showed me that it doesn't have to be that way all the time, that you got to take care of things. But some of the funny things, everyone was terrified of my father at my school, at all of our schools. My father would walk in and he would stand there, and I'm a 58. My father was a 62. His shoulders with his jacket. He'd walk in, he'd stand there. I wish to speak to whoever is in charge of this establishment. And then the people are standing there like, he wishes to do what? And they understood that after 2.5 hours of them not being able to move, you would think that somebody talking too much would get people tired. They would stand there like this. And after it was over, anything that you would like, Mr. Goodwin, in order to get him to leave. So that happened, and from that day on, there was a file at every one of my schools. Ezekiel Edward Goodwin is to conduct his own parent-teacher conferences. You are to accept his notes for absences. He is to attend all of his report card parent-teacher conferences on his own in lieu of Archibald. Every time. So the way that my father's laugh and his presence is what I take with me as well. And I'm almost done, so hang in. My father's cooking. That man made some of the worst meals in the world. But he did it to try to stretch out the family. He made it because we loved him and because there was nothing else. But he made some of the most amazing dishes. When Grandma and Grandpa would come, and when they would come, there would be this huge thing. There are pictures of us with a barbecue, and I'm gonna bring you into this, and you know what I'm gonna say. You do. So my cousin, so Ronald comes one time, and my father is barbecuing side of the house. So now the story comes in with little Ron. We're all playing in this gravel driveway, and when we were younger, I didn't realize that my jealousy of my cousin was a need for me to be close to him. So I thought I didn't like him when I was really young. Until he took the gravel from the driveway, picked it up, and threw it in my eye. Yeah, I'm calling you out. But why? The reason I'm telling this story is, we're 4 or 5 years old. It makes no difference. But what my father, and I haven't shared this with Ronald, but what my father pulled me to the side and said, as I'm sitting there crying, he's cooking, he left his food, which he rarely did, and he said to me, what happened here, you have to learn to forgive. Not for him, but for you. But then he said to me, in the same way that I hope that you forgive me. That stuck with me. Because in all of his years, and all that happened that was bad, and all that happened that was in darkness, and all that happened that we wish to cover up, those things that we wish to keep away, I remember that every minute. Forgive. And as the years went on, there's a lot of stories, but we weren't allowed to do the stuff that normal kids did. And I held that in, and I kept it for years. But I saw him, and he just said to me, son, I hope you forgive me. And he said it over and over and over. I hope you forgive me. I never forgave him about it. Just bad. But as I grew older, going towards the end of his life, because my father was like 40 years old when he had me, 41 when my mother had me, I went through life looking at him and saying, I hope to God that I do not end up like you. As a teenager, I was like, you can't do it. No rules, you do whatever you want, speeches, anger, all of that stuff. And toward the end of his life, within the past 10 years, I thought of all of the things that I wanted to take with me that I wanted to be with my father. I want someday people to remember whatever they'd like to remember about him, because there was a presence there. He had presence. So my father was, as I said earlier, the callus on his hand to me, in my mind, in my memory. The laugh, the sound of the crutches, the stories that he would tell. My father was a brilliant man. Not to throw those words out there. Regardless of what people believe the future was to be because of his gifts, brilliant man. And towards the end of it, we sat because I work for the Center for Disease Control. It's not the most exciting job. But we spoke about bloodborne pathogens. We spoke about this stuff, and we spoke about what it would mean for a hydrophobic terminus when it came to cell integration. Nothing super exciting. But my father knew that. And I spent years trying to learn it. And from his bed for the past 10 years, he taught so much. So at the end, and I'm going to end the sad part of it with how he passed. Many, many illnesses brought him to the end. And my sister, Marilyn, or Nani, you don't know her, she's not here, she's here in spirit, sat with him 10 to 12 hours a day the past 16 months and took care of him. So as the surgery was not as successful, as his body started to break down in the way that bodies do when too much has happened, he would just ask us to sit with him. We'd sit, watch an old black and white movie. We'd sit and talk to him. He'd send scriptures every day by text message. He'd send stuff every day. But in the hospital, he wasn't able to recognize us as much, which is not my father, and which you might all be familiar with when it comes to parents towards the end. And at the end, he said to me a few days before, because in 3 months, I was almost pronounced. An artery was cut during a surgery with me, and I was almost lost. So he would talk about that too. He would say what he believed should happen, and then it happened to my sister. And my sister had an emergency surgery. And my brother had an emergency surgery all within 3 months. And our father was just continue to pray, continue to forgive, continue to be there to support. So I tried to be that for him, and the rest of us tried to be that for him. So going towards the end of his life, my father was black and white movies, incredibly funny stories, some of the worst combination of food that he could eat, and he'd eat it because he did what he did. And then continuing to talk about Renee, and continuing to talk about Ronald and Angel and Alicia and Barbara and Karen and Deborah and everyone that he could name. And he would continue to do that. My father remembered almost everything. So, one day, and I'll finish the story with my dad's actual humor. For a year, I would go into my father's room, and he'd be staring at the TV, the lights would be flashing off of his face. I knew the TV was on. No volume whatsoever. Every day, at the same time. Till one day, I had finished changing stuff, and I walked out of the room, and he said to me, "You know, Tyra Banks is one of the most captivating and interesting women that I have ever come to experience. Her show is amazing. And one day I'm going to take that show off of mute, and I'm actually going to care about what she has to say." That was among some of the things, and I mean, a joke could take a year, but he meant it. My father may not have been the most successful in the eyes of the world, or the most strong in the eyes of the world. But everything that he did, he believed in. So, palaces and late night talks and the laughter of a lion and amazing stories and an amazing heart is what I will take with me above all else. Not the suffering, not the pain, not any of the torture, not any of the trials that we have gone through, because that happened. That will fade. My father's love is eternal. And I'll keep that with me for the rest of my life. So I thank you all for coming tonight and sharing this time with us.
All right, this is all.